As a result of some of the things that were taking place at my uncle's residence before he passed along last August, there have been many people who made statements in reference to the personal conduct and character of not just my uncle, but myself and my entire family, driven by what was taking place in an area called 27th Street off of 3rd Avenue here in Columbus, Georgia. Most people don't really know the details about what was going over there, and they certainly don't have any evidence for their claims, and they certainly don't have any information that shows that they took the time out to come and talk with me or anybody that would legitimately know who was not contributing to the problems over there. The main culprit that led to the downfall of my uncle and the living conditions over there in that area was a person named Lessie Diane Smith. I met Lessie Diane Smith and people that were related her to her upon my return when I came back to Georgia in 2007 to first try to locate where my dead mother was buried, because nobody in my family would tell me where my mother was buried. Nobody would tell me what the real circumstances of her death involved, etc. So I had to come back down here to find out. I opted not to go to my mother's funeral because with everything that I had going on in my life at that time, I felt that that was too much for me personally. I felt like I didn't want to come back down here and let a bunch of people who didn't do anything to help protect me, my mother, or anyone else pretend as if they care for her in some way that was not consistent with what they did while she was living. It's just like my dead uncle, for example. I mean, the funeral was pretty much filled, but hardly any of those people even showed up to say hello. They didn't come and check on him. They didn't really do anything, but everybody knew about him. And Leslie Diane Smith, after all that she had done, had the nerve to show up at the funeral as if she was concerned, when the actual evidence shows that her motives and her conduct was something entirely different. Now, this was all a conspiracy. And some people don't believe in conspiracy theory because they believe that anybody that believes in conspiracy theory is a person that is either a person that's paranoid or a person that can't identify what the source of what their claim is. Well, I want to illustrate for you that I do know what the source for the claim is, and I do have evidence to validate and substantiate exactly what I am describing. The Columbus Police Department was already involved in this, and so was the city. They were involved because they had knowledge of the fact that my uncle was with her, for starters. She worked at a place called Kroger. She worked at a place called Burger King. And I believe, if I am correct, she also worked at a Crystal at one point for a short period in time. That may or may not be true, but I know for sure she worked at the Burger King. Now, this is a person that cannot read and write, that's illiterate to this day, and she's over 50 years old. This is a person that is hopelessly addicted to crack cocaine and alcohol and drugs and immoral conduct at a level that I've never seen. Now, the police had knowledge of this person and her conduct going back to at least 2005. Now, she's had miscellaneous charges, numerous charges that are already in the system for other things, offenses that she's committed. But this particular one was something that polarized the entire city. Because when you're talking about things associated with the safety of children and missing children, she was number one on the radar as a person who had the potential to do something crazy. Because on November 7, 2005, they reported that some missing boys had been found after a citywide search in the Columbus Ledger-Inquirer. 4 boys were back home Sunday afternoon after their whereabouts were unknown for more than 24 hours. Columbus police said an Amber Alert was issued about 9:30 a.m. and suspended about 3:15 p.m. for 3 brothers, Barham Smith, 8, Burrell Smith, 8, and Brandon Smith, 12, and their cousin, Daquan Edwards, who was also 12. The parents reported the children missing a little after 5 a.m. Sunday morning, Lieutenant Randy Hart said. The last time they were seen was 2:30 p.m. Saturday when they were dropped off at the corner of 4th Street and 4th Avenue. The boys were supposed to meet up with the father of the brothers, who was at Memorial Stadium, but a mix-up in communication prevented that meeting. Sunday morning and afternoon, Columbus police were working with local media to get the word out of the children's disappearance and were fielding calls from people who thought they may have seen the children, Hart said. Search parties were combing areas in the city, including the Chattahoochee Riverwalk. Georgia State Patrol had a helicopter flying over the city looking for the children, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation was also involved in the search. Around 3 p.m. Sunday, the boys were spotted in the Booker T. Washington Apartments, 445 Fifth Avenue, where they had spent the night with a relative, police said. Now, if we're going to talk about the city being involved, the state being involved, if an Amber Alert is issued for missing children, that is a statewide and potentially regional alert. If the Georgia Bureau of Investigation is involved, that is a state investment. If the Georgia State Patrol is flying a helicopter over the city looking for children, that is a state and city investment. If they have search parties, which include all law enforcement agencies, combing the city, including the Chattahoochee Riverwalk, that is a city and state investment. I didn't get back here to 2007. This happened in 2005. Lessie Diane Smith took some children to her home and kept them overnight without letting anybody know where the children were. It was rumored when they were down there in those housing projects that she was also potentially doing something to the children in an intimate kind of way. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not true, but that's what's been stated about why she chose not to tell anybody where the children were. Now, the original story ran, and everybody acted as if they had no idea what happened to those children. And only after they expended all of those resources, got all those agencies involved, did they come up with some information through what they claim was an investigation to substantiate what they claim took place. So nobody can tell me that they didn't have any idea that Lessie Diane Smith was a danger to herself and others at that point, and that she was not on some type of radar within law enforcement. Because nobody's going to invest that much into an individual who does something like that, and there's no consequence or residual effect of it. Now, she was able to play crazy and act like, oh, I didn't know I did anything wrong, I can't read and write, etc. Well, then how did she have her own apartment independently with a child? How did she know to take the children to her place then? So, Lessie Smith, it's Lessie Diane Smith, but they wrote Lessie Smith, 38, of 500 Fifth Avenue, was arrested Sunday night and charged with 4 counts of misdemeanor interference with custody for keeping brothers. I don't know if it's Barham or Bareem, but it's one of them. So I'm just going to say Barham for now. Barham Smith, 8, Burrell Smith, 8, Brandon Smith, 12, and their cousin Daquan Edwards, who's also 12, at her house. She's being held at the Muskogee County Jail on bonds totaling $1,000. She is scheduled to appear in Recorder's Court at 2 p.m. today. She took custody of the children without the parents' knowledge or permission, said Lieutenant Randy Hart of the Columbus Police Department. You can't take people's children without their permission. The boys were dropped off by a family friend at about 2:30 p.m. Saturday at the corner of 4th Street and 4th Avenue, Hart said. The children were supposed to meet their brother's father, who was working at Memorial Stadium. There was some mix-up of where the spot would be, and the person left them there on the corner, Hart said. The children were reported missing at 5:30 a.m. Sunday after the father got home from work and learned the boys weren't home. The search ended about 3:15 when family members got a phone call from an unknown person saying the children, were outside the Booker T. Washington apartments at 500 Fifth Avenue, Hart said. The boys had spent the night at Lessie Smith's home. The 10-hour search involved Columbus and Phoenix City Police, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and a Georgia State Patrol helicopter. Then it went on to say on November 9th that Lessie Smith, 38 of 500 Fifth Avenue, is now facing those 4 charges. Her charges ended up being reduced over the weekend to reckless conduct instead of interfering with the custody of 4 children. So I don't know how that part worked out when they negotiated some plea or something for her to have appeared to be reckless in conduct instead of interfering with child custody. Smith originally faced charges of misdemeanor interference of custody, to which she pleaded not guilty Tuesday in Recorder's Court. After 3 convictions of interference with custody, Georgia law states that the crime becomes a felony. So they pled down to avoid giving her a felony for what she actually did. The boys' whereabouts were unknown for more than 24 hours when their parents reported them missing Sunday. They were found at Lessie Smith's house at about 3:15 p.m. Sunday by a family member. The boys had spent the night at her house. Police Detective Vincent Lockhart said during court testimony that the children were dropped off by a family friend on the corner of 4th Street and Veterans Parkway at 2:30 p.m. Saturday. They were supposed to meet with the brother's father, who was working at A.J. McClung Memorial Stadium. The children never met the father and instead went to a playground and milled around the stadium before getting to Lessie Smith's apartment by 1 a.m. Sunday. Lessie Smith is a friend of Daquan Edwards' mother. The mother of the brothers didn't know Lessie Smith. Between 1 a.m. and 3 p.m., the children weren't fed, but otherwise, they weren't physically harmed. Lockhart said, also during that time, she made no attempts to contact the parents of the children. Now, it was rumored that she was messing around with them children in sexual ways. The people that were around the area, the people that know her, said that was the reason that she took them home, and that was the reason that she didn't tell their parents, because she was fooling around with them. I don't know if that's true or not. But I know, regardless of the fact, she did something that she knew she wasn't supposed to do, and she also knew that she was supposed to contact their parents, regardless of the circumstances. Now, this family has a history of violence. They have some of the deepest investment in violence in the history of the state. Her brother, Leroy Smith, they call him Leroy here. He was charged with armed robbery and sentenced to 14 years in prison. He was released somewhere around 2009, 2010. He went into a place with a shotgun to rob somebody for money. Her other brother, Willie Smith, ended up having to have a competency exam to see if he was fit for a trial for murdering a woman. The story reads as follows. The 4th doctor says the man is fit for trial, and competency of man in jail since 1998 is up to a jury. So they kept him in jail from 1998 to at least 2001. For 3 years, Willie L. Smith has been locked away, occasionally removed from the Muskogee County Jail and taken to West Central Georgia Regional Hospital for tests to see whether he's competent to stand trial for the 1998 murder of his girlfriend. The first 3 psychologists to probe Smith found he was incompetent, unable to relate to the legal process or to assist his court-appointed attorney. But the 4th psychologist said Smith is competent and has been faking to avoid going to trial. A Muskogee Superior Court jury was picked Monday to decide who is right. That jury won't hear details of the criminal allegations that Smith is accused of beating to death his girlfriend, 39-year-old Patricia Ford, on April 11, 1998, in the 4th Avenue apartment they shared. Judge John D. Allen, Judge Allen, was involved in this case. So he had knowledge of my uncle, he had knowledge of Lessie Diane Smith, the district attorney did, and the living conditions too. There was no way they couldn't have. Judge John D. Allen told the jurors their decision has nothing to do with whether Smith was sane or insane or whether he knew right from wrong at the time of the alleged crime. Their only duty, he said, will be to decide whether Smith is competent to stand trial. Defense attorney William Mason told jurors 31-year-old Smith, who grew up in Florida, can neither read nor write and has drifted from job to job, making a living basically by working on small engines. After his arrest, it was clear that he was unable to understand the legal system or even whether he had made a statement to police, the lawyer said. The 3 psychologists who found him incompetent concluded he also is mildly retarded, Mason said. Only the 4th psychologist, who examined him 3 years after the slaying, reached a different conclusion, he said. At the end of his proceeding, I expect you to find he's not ready yet to go on trial, Mason said. But District Attorney Gray Conger said Dr. Roger Enfield's conclusion that Smith is competent is based on a finding that Smith is able to understand the system and can adequately assist his attorney. So Gray Conger, the district attorney before Julia Slater, was part of this. They all had knowledge of it. Enfield also determined Smith is malingering, exaggerating symptoms of the extent of his ignorance, the prosecutor said. He told Enfield he doesn't want to go to trial, but wants to spend the rest of his life in a mental hospital rather than in prison, where he will be if he is convicted of these charges, Conger told the jury. He also said jurors will hear from jailers who will say Smith is as sane as anybody down there. The hearing will continue at 9 a.m. today in Judge Allen's 7th floor courtroom. So this family has a history of violence. Now, I'm also going to go on and tell you about the other brother. There's yet another one who also murdered his mate. Man held in shotgun murder case. A Columbus man is in the Muskogee County Jail, charged with the shotgun murder of the woman he sometimes stayed with, Arthur Lee Smith, 27, whose last known address is 520 First Avenue Apartment B, is charged with murder in possession of a sawed-off shotgun. Diana McPherson, 32, was shot and killed about 10:15 p.m. Tuesday after Smith went into her 341 28th Street home, according to Columbus Police Major George Potter. Smith, who had been staying at McPherson's home part-time, allegedly got into an argument with her, then grabbed a 12-gauge shotgun, a sawed-off, loaded with buckshots, and shot McPherson at close range. He shot her in the face. He shot her in the head. McPherson's 16-year-old daughter witnessed the shooting, and McPherson's 4 other children, ages 14, 12, 9, and 8, were in the house at the time, according to police reports. On September 10th, police answered an aggravated assault call regarding Smith, who allegedly had cut McPherson on the neck, but McPherson did not press charges, according to police reports. Potter said there was an alleged history of Smith abusing McPherson. Smith was arrested about 8 a.m. Wednesday on Highway 80 by Phoenix City police. He waived extradition from Phoenix City to Columbus and is scheduled for Recorder's Court hearing at 2 p.m. today. Now, Willie Lee Smith, his mate died because he went over there and beat her to death. with his fist and killed her. Mad about some alleged other relationship or some claim of a quarrel between those two. And as you can see, Arthur Smith, he took a sawed-off shotgun and shot Diana McPherson in the head and face and killed her. Both of them ended up in mental institution rather than prison for domestic violence. If you're incompetent and you stupid, then how did you have a girlfriend? How did you know how to beat somebody up? Well, they released Willie Lee, from my understanding, recently. So he can kill a woman and beat him dead. And then they let him back out into society as a free person. But a person who hasn't done anything to anybody might go get a life sentence or be executed. That's what's taking place in Georgia here. Lessie Diane Smith has some of the deepest violence in his history. Her family has some of the deepest violence in the history in the state. I want to make sure that the information that I had been researching was accurate. I wanted to make sure before coming to any conclusions. They took Arthur Lee Smith and Willie Lee Smith out there to West Central Hospital, a mental health facility. Judge Roemer was involved with this. Judge Roemer is the one that Teresa Tomlinson was so happy about, and he's the one that handled a lot of other controversial cases here in this community. Alonzo Whitaker, the current prosecutor that's over there now, he was also involved in this case. So they already knew that there was imminent danger over there in that area, and they neglected to do anything about it. Julius Slater even signed off on part of this case. So they already knew it was imminent. So when you're talking about literal malfeasance and negligence, when I'm calling the police over there to help police the danger that was taking place over there and they ignored it, there's no way that can't be negligence. There's no way that can't be malfeasance, because they had prior knowledge of some of the conduct of the relatives in the family already. And they knew that she was more at risk than anyone as the only girl. And they knew that she was living with my uncle at that residence. Now, my uncle was never supposed to be in charge of Lessie Diane Smith. My uncle was an older person. He was not qualified to deal with a mentally ill person and be a guardian with a knee replacement and a pacemaker, living in those kinds of conditions and responsible for their checks and their monies. Lessie Diane Smith did not receive a single day of treatment or therapy for her mental health issues the entire time that I was there. And they were giving her a monthly check that she used to smoke crack and bring people in and out of that property all day, every day, to drink and smoke and have sex. And when the police refused to do anything about it, I had to start documenting something, because they were just going to make it seem like it wasn't even happening. They were waiting for a murder to take place over there so they could just chalk it up with the rest of the family and then write this crazy story about it. When they charged Arthur Lee Smith, the one that shot them, they charged him with an incident on September 27, 1994, that said he unlawfully assaulted Sonia K. McPherson with a deadly weapon, to wit, a shotgun, by discharging said shotgun towards Sonia K. McPherson, contrary to the laws of the state, the good order, peace, and dignity thereof. They also said that he unlawfully and with malice aforethought either express, implied, caused the death of another human being, to wit, Diana McPherson, by shooting Diana McPherson in the head, contrary to the laws of the said state, the good order and peace and dignity thereof. He was charged with aggravated assault, as well. Because on the 10th day of September, as I mentioned, Diana McPherson had been cut on the neck with a knife by him allegedly, and she refused to press charges when the police came. And so all of these people had something to do with it. You're talking about Judge John Allen, Alonzo Whitaker, Gray Conger, Julia Slater, etc. These are people that are sitting in office right now. Not to mention the guy they used to call the old lion, who was the main public defender over there. They gave him $1 million budget before he decided to retire. His name is Robert Watkins. He was working over there with one of the current assistant district attorneys now. Her name is Robin King. Now, I don't know if Robin was working on this case, but Robert Watkins was the main one that worked it. At that time, Mel Hyde, who is now a federal prosecutor over there with Crawford Seals in the federal court, he was an assistant district attorney for the city at that time. So all of these people that you see actively involved in this community right now covered all this up. And so they sent the guy out to West Central Hospital to have a competency exam. And they wrote up a summary that Arthur L. Smith is a 28-year-old black male who appears his stated age. His physical condition is unremarkable. His speech is marked by very poor articulation, and at times he mumbles, which means that he is not always comprehensible. His behavior during the examination was hostile and essentially non-cooperative. Early on, he got in his mind that I was going to send him to prison, and repeated attempts that I was going to send him to prison on my part to correct that were not successful. He did attempt tasks given to him, but remained hostile throughout the environment. Recent memory, as well as immediate recall memories, were impaired. He could not name the current or past presidents. He was unable to name 3 objects given to him after approximately a half hour. Memory for his long-term or personal history was in keeping with his retardation. His thought processes were fully in touch with reality, and his speech did not proceed from stimulus to logical conclusion. There were times when he acted as if he were experiencing auditory hallucinations, meaning that there were times when he would stop responding and look up at the ceiling, look at the door when there was obviously no stimuli to which he was responding. He did not talk back or respond to if he was in fact hearing things. He also continues to present with ongoing paranoia. This may not necessarily be delusional, but he was certainly on the defensive at all times while in my presence. In addition, suspiciousness is ongoing. As I have said earlier, coming to the conclusion that I was going to send him to prison. His effect was appropriate, although as already stated, hostile. He was oriented to person and place, but not to time or the reason for being here. As assessed with the abbreviated Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale revised with the abbreviated revised with his judgment is very severely impaired. He obtained a scale score of 2, which compared to an average score of 10. On the same test, he obtained a full-scale IQ of 52, which would place him within the mild range of mental retardation. This is considered valid. Neurological screening was completed with the Bender-Gestalt test. On this particular test, his fine motor skills are equivalent to between 5 years, 6 months, and 5 years, 8 months of age. Emotional indicators from this same test suggest the possibility of mental confusion, poor planning ability, emotional constriction, and anxiety. Due to the fact he has no reading skills, objective personality assessment was not attempted. This examiner would diagnose him as being mildly retarded. In addition, this examiner would give him a tentative diagnosis of a psychotic disorder. Not otherwise specified, it is impossible at this point to get other sources of data or history on him. It may be that he is not psychotic, but simply retarded, and that, as is occasionally seen with retarded individuals, they act like, become aggressive, fight, and become paranoid and suspicious. These behaviors are frequently encountered and are controlled with neuroleptic medication, which could very well be the situation in this case. Competency for trial. This examiner does not consider him at this point in time to be competent to stand trial. During this evaluation, his attorney of record was contacted, and in fact, Arthur Smith and his attorney conversed over the telephone. The same sort of lack of understanding and confusion that I have described in this report was manifest while the client was talking to his attorney. In light of the fact that he is on psychotropic medications at the present time, this examiner really does not consider there to be much room for improvement, and very likely the lack of competency is due to his intellectual abilities. And I think they should have said intellectual inabilities, but the court gets the gist of it. And so they go on to measure the degree of criminal responsibility, the ability to formulate intent, and other mental conditions that the judge must consider to determine whether or not they believe a person is competent for trial. His public defense counsel was James Messner. Mel Hyde, the assistant district attorney, was involved. Pat Sykes, who was the RN at the Muskogee County Jail, and Kashmira Parekh, who was the clinical director at West Central, I presume, for his forensic file. So I just wanted to make sure that I had a clear understanding of what actually transpired before I drew any conclusions about what happened in that situation. But ultimately, it indicates that the Smith family has a history of violence. And I mean imminent violence. Now, I don't know why my uncle selected anybody like that. And I don't know why my uncle chose to stay with anybody like that and let them destroy him in that kind of way. But I know his daughters were not involved, and I know my family was not involved to assist them over there. And I knew something was wrong. I knew somebody was going to end up hurt, killed, or dead in that yard, which definitely happened for the most part. Nobody was killed because I was there, but it came so close that the consideration was legitimate. It was terrible what took place over there. Now, in September of 2001, Willie Smith received a 20-year sentence on voluntary manslaughter charge. When the jurors returned Tuesday morning to Muskogee Superior Court for the second day of the trial to determine whether Willie L. Smith was competent to stand trial for murder, they were told to wait. For more than an hour they waited, then they were told they were no longer needed. Smith, who was 31 at the time, stopped the civil trial by pleading guilty but mentally ill and retarded to a reduced charge of voluntary manslaughter in the April 11, 1998 beating death of his girlfriend, Patricia Ford. Judge John D. Allen sentenced Smith to 20 years in prison. District Attorney Gray Conger said the sentence assures Smith will remain behind bars longer than he might have if convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. A life sentence may be considered for parole after 14 years. But a 20-year term for voluntary manslaughter may be considered for parole only after 90% of the sentence has been served under State Board of Pardons and Paroles rules. That means Smith must remain behind bars for at least 18 years. Smith will be examined upon reaching the Diagnostic and Classification Center at Jackson State Prison, where his prison assignment will be determined, Congress said. While jurors waited Tuesday morning, Allen heard testimony from a state clinical psychologist, Dr. Roger Enfield, who said his examination of Smith showed the man was a malingerer or one who faked the symptoms that would show he is not competent to stand trial. Enfield was the fourth psychologist to examine Smith since his 1998 arrest, and the first three found the man was incapable of assisting defense attorney William Mason in preparation for his murder trial. Allen also heard testimony from the three Muskogee County Jail corrections officers who said they found Smith to be little different from any other inmate awaiting trial. And so basically what it boils down to, and it's the same thing that Lessie Diane Smith would brag about over there when she would violate other people and my uncle. They played crazy to keep from going to prison and to keep from getting a death sentence. Lessie Diane Smith would say it all the time. I ain't going to no prison. I'm crazy. Now, one time they called her out to go do some evaluation to determine whether or not she would remain eligible for receiving a fixed income check at taxpayer expense for the rest of her life, both of which her and her son get, and both of them used it to basically smoke drugs and do all of that kind of stuff. Nobody else, nobody paid rent, etc. Nobody cleaned, nobody really did anything. She came back bragging about how she told the people that she was seeing snakes. She said she'll tell them anything that they want to hear to make them think she's crazy so she can keep getting her check. Playing the system. That's what really happened. And so there was an incident where the police department, to help cover these incidents up, tried to come and they made a false arrest on me because of her. And I posted it online so that people could not only see her conduct, but see the nature of what the officer was willing to do to help the police department and the city and obviously the state cover this up by way of the FBI, the GBI, which is the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the Georgia State Patrol, who was flying over in a helicopter, the Columbus Police Department, the Phoenix City Police Department, obviously the sheriff had to be involved, etc. Now, you're telling me that if Julius Slater had knowledge of it, you're telling me that if Judge John Allen, who's one of the most celebrated judges around here, had knowledge of it and was involved, you're telling me that if Alonzo Whitaker, Gray Conger, Mel Hyde, and all these people were involved in this, they had no knowledge of this situation when I was going to the city telling them there were problems over there and repeatedly calling the police to come help police it. They wanted a murder or a tragedy to take place over there. You can't fake this. You don't have to. It's a legitimate conspiracy to cover it up. And so when I came into play, I was able to intercept some certain things, obtain some knowledge about this very material right here, plus obtain information about what was actually taking place in the scene. So they started attacking me. And that's what all of the stuff that they're doing to me now is about. And all of this took place, all of it, in Mimi Woodson's district. She boasts of her 20 years and the council. All of this stuff with the same family and the same involvement of people took place in the district of Mimi Woodson. There's no way they didn't know. And when I went before them telling them about these incidents, telling them about the false arrest, telling them about the money that I needed desperately, that I had to use to deal with this situation, you can see for yourselves in a government record how she treated me. How she and all of the people on the city council ignored it and covered it up. That is a conspiracy. Because there's no way they didn't have knowledge of it. And then they started attacking my character. They started attacking my reputation. They started attacking my image to make me look like I'm a bad citizen because they didn't want the public to know about this. So before you start judging someone, you need to make sure you have all the information because they invested the whole town in this. They were going to use this as their crime TV. They were going to use this as some type of criminal movies that the police could lead charge in. They were going to use this to sell film and products. And so basically they tried to blame me for messing up their conspiracy to exploit these kinds of imminent problems in a community. And so they attacked me, messed up my reputation, assaulted my career, etc. right here in Columbus, Georgia. And I'm here to tell you, and here's the proof. And I don't know any of these people personally. And I asked my uncle one day, I said, Uncle Charlie, why on earth, of all the people that you could have selected, why did you pick somebody like this? It was because they took his job some years ago. They subjected him to the same kinds of things they've subjected me and other people to. He had no place to go, no place to stay, no place to live, etc. And that's how some of that evolved. Just trying to find a place to stay, trying to find a place to survive until he could do his own thing again. That's how that happened. But I still believe that something had to be going on with him to be willing to stay and keep it under those conditions. I have never seen conditions like that. And you could go back there and clean it up, and it was if there was this filth disorder where, like, if something was too clean or orderly, they were angry at you. And so all I could do at that point was play along and make it seem like I had no idea what was going on, because they didn't even really know I was related to him in general in the area, and just find out what was really going on and who was supposed to be doing something that didn't. And so the city tried to attack me. Now, at the same time I returned back, they had John Russell Rusty Hauser in the news, and they were trying to force him into involuntary commitment, and neighbors and other people in the community were turning against him to create the monster that became the person that went down to Louisiana, went into a film called Trainwreck, starring Amy Schumer, who is a distant relative of Chuck Schumer for Congress, and opened fire on those people because of the anger that he had towards that cinema and other places in Columbus that ruined his life and ran him out of town. That's what really happened. That's what they didn't tell. That's what they didn't show. That's the conspiracy. And the Georgia Assembly invested in passing House Bill 37, a mental health involuntary commitment bill, exploiting the circumstances and dynamics that they know they were faced with that guy. His father used to be the tax commissioner before Lula Huff took over. Lula Huff obtained the tax commissioner's position by way of something associated with his dad's previous position. And Lula Huff was even involved in attacking the man because they claim he was pilfering signs, campaign signs. So people that were running for that position, he was going and pulling their campaigns up out of the ground to prevent them from getting public attention. And they arrested him, and that's when it all started. He was angry because they messed up his life. That's what they do to people here. And all kinds of people, judges, reporters, all kinds of people that might not have even known him personally, had all of these stories to tell. They ran press all throughout the area. They ran press all throughout the country. And all of it stemmed right here in Columbus, Georgia. And they told what he did, which was bad at the end of it. But they never told what they did to cause him to become what he became. And I witnessed all that stuff. So yes, it was a conspiracy. They're lying. They're dishonest. And they never thought they'd be accountable. And they don't want anybody asking any questions here except the press that they sponsor. So a lot of the stories that come off the press, they're strategic. They're bought. Even if it's something adverse to the city, they still pay them for how they want that to turn out. They're not going to make the admission that they do, but they do. That's why they have a government reporter that shows up at the council meetings and reports on government findings and happenings. That's what that's all about. So until they learn how to be a more honest community, these problems are going to persist. You can't fake this here. And if I hadn't recorded this and documented it, nobody would ever have known. They would have buried it and let somebody claiming to be a reporter or a producer write about it later. And they attached her name to mine as if we know one another or as if we have some relationship with one another. And I don't know her. I don't know where they came from. I found all that out later. About her being from Florida, them being from Florida, and then moving to Enterprise, Alabama. She wanted crack so bad that when her father died, she wouldn't even go to his funeral because she thought she was going to miss a hit. I mean, it was bad over there. And the police, I bet you 150 different police officers came over to that residence and they still wouldn't do anything. And so when the city came in and enforced those actions and put all of that stuff in the press, enforced that unlawful dispossessory, that's what they were trying to cover up. They were trying to get rid of it and then make it look like somebody else was to blame.